There is a particular kind of evening that New York saves for October, the kind where the last warmth of the year sits in the light at a low angle, turning everything it touches to something worth keeping. Cab windows, scaffolding pipes, the upturned faces of people who have stopped, just for a second, to notice that the season is leaving. It was that kind of evening. The leaves came down in slow spirals, gold and amber catching the last of the light before settling against the brass-edged curb outside Aurelian. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a midtown tower, its frosted glass facade glowing warm against the darkening avenue. A doorman in a charcoal overcoat held the entrance open with practiced stillness, nodding at each arriving guest the way diplomats nod at one another, acknowledging presence without conceding anything. Victoria Hale did not look at him. She walked through the door, already holding her phone, already reading the message thread from her CFO, already calculating the minutes she could afford before the 8:30 call with the Singapore office. Behind her, moving with the careful deliberateness of a child trying not to be noticed, was her son. Ethan was 11. He wore a navy blazer that fit him too well, the kind of clothing that spoke of tailors and not of childhood. His brown hair was combed to one side. His hands were in his pockets. He walked into Aurelian the way he walked into most places, quietly, hoping not to disappoint anyone. He was good at it. He had been practicing since he was old enough to understand that his mother moved through the world at a speed that required people around her to either match it or get out of the way, and that a child who needed things was a variable she had not fully solved for. This was not a criticism. It was simply a fact about the architecture of their life together. The way the angle of a building is not a criticism of the building. He loved his mother. He was also, at 11, beginning to understand that love and ease were different things, and that their apartment, the 42nd floor 3-bedroom on the Upper West Side with the view that guests always gasped at, was full of the first and somewhat short on the second. The maître d' brought them to a corner table near the window. Victoria's usual. Crystal overhead. White linen. A small arrangement of white roses that no one would ever touch. Victoria sat down, placed her phone face up beside her fork, and picked up the wine list. The menu at Aurelian was 12 pages long and changed with the seasons. Victoria had eaten here 40 or 50 times and ordered from the same 3 sections each time. She liked the efficiency of familiarity. She liked knowing what a thing would be before it arrived. Uncertainty, in most areas of her life, was a problem to be solved, rather than an experience to be had. Ethan sat across from her and said nothing. He had already read his menu twice. He put it down. He looked at the roses. He looked at his own hands. He looked at the couple, 2 tables over, who were laughing about something that had happened that day. The woman reaching across to touch the man's arm, easy and instinctive, the kind of gesture you make when you've stopped thinking about whether to make it. He was looking at the table beside them. The man at the next table had the kind of face that had once been younger and hadn't forgotten it. Dark circles beneath steady eyes. A jaw that carried a few days of stubble without apology. His jacket was olive canvas, the sort you buy in a military surplus store and wear until it knows the shape of your shoulders. He had rolled the sleeves to the elbow, and on his left forearm, half hidden by the cuff, was the edge of a scar that looked like it had not been made by accident. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was 38 years old, a widower, and the father of a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who was currently explaining to him, with enormous authority, that spaghetti was better than penne because it was more fun to spin. He had not planned to come to Aurelian tonight. Lily's 3rd-grade class had performed in a small recital at school that afternoon, 20 minutes of uncertain recorder playing, and one surprisingly confident violin solo from a boy named Max, and Lily had stood at the back in a yellow dress and clapped so hard for everyone that her hands were pink afterward. Walking home, she had stopped on the corner of 57th and looked up at the restaurant with its warm-lit windows and said, simply, "That looks like a celebration place." He had not argued. He had made a mental calculation about his checking account and decided that certain evenings were worth what they cost in ways that could not be entered on a spreadsheet. "You can't argue with physics, Daddy," Lily said. She had her mother's coloring auburn hair, light freckles across the bridge of her nose, and her father's directness. She was the kind of child who made eye contact when she spoke and expected you to do the same. Daniel was cutting the spaghetti into smaller lengths on her plate, a service she had not requested and would not acknowledge, because accepting help would undermine the spin argument. "I'm not arguing," he said. "I'm just making it manageable. That's the same thing." She picked up her fork and attempted a dramatic spin. Half of it landed on the tablecloth. "See?" he said, and handed her a clean napkin. Ethan watched all of this. He watched Daniel lean across and wipe the sauce from Lily's chin without ceremony, without irritation. Watched Daniel listen, actually listen, setting down his own fork when Lily switched topics to something about a caterpillar she had found at school. Watched the two of them exist in the same space the way people do when they are entirely comfortable with each other, unhurried, not performing. Ethan's phone was also on the table. No one had told him to put it there. He'd put it there because that was what you did at meals. You put your phone on the table and you existed within its proximity. He had not looked at it in 4 minutes, which was a record. Victoria was still reading the message thread. "Mom." She looked up. Something in his voice had a quality she rarely heard from him. Not need, exactly, but something adjacent to it. A kind of longing directed outward. "What?" He nodded toward the next table. "He looks like a real dad." Victoria Hale was not a woman who was caught off guard. She had negotiated with sovereign wealth funds. She had fired board members in their own boardrooms. She had sat across the table from people who tried to intimidate her and had outweighted every one of them. But her 11-year-old son saying those 5 words, with that particular expression on his face, was something her defenses were not positioned for. She put the phone down. "Can we sit with them?" Ethan asked. The question was delivered with the careful tentativeness of someone who already knew the answer was probably no. He was already preparing to accept the no. He was already organizing his expression into something neutral and accommodating. Victoria looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the next table. She saw Daniel cut the pasta without looking down, because he had done it 100 times and his hands knew the angle. She saw Lily telling a story with her hands, elbows on the table, completely unself-conscious. She saw the breadbasket between them, half empty, the torn edges of the rolls suggesting they'd been eating and talking for a while, in no particular hurry. There was no phone on Daniel's side of the table. There was no briefcase. No security detail waited near the door. There was nothing in that tableau that resembled the dinners Victoria had grown up in, the dinners she had replicated for her son without meaning to. Efficient, scheduled, accompanied by the low hum of unread messages. A thing she had been telling herself for 2 years, that she would fix this. That next month she would schedule more evenings like this, that Ethan was fine, that he was resilient, that children of successful parents develop independence began, very quietly, to sound like what it was. An excuse. She had a very good mind for strategy. She could hold 8 competing variables at once and rank them by impact. She could see 3 moves ahead in a negotiation and position herself at the 4th. She had never, in all of that cognitive machinery, applied it to the question of what her son needed, because applying it would have meant acknowledging that the answer was something she had not been providing. It took 30 seconds at the most. The calculation completed. She accepted the result. She stood up. It was not a dramatic gesture. She simply pushed her chair back and rose, and then she walked 3 steps to the adjacent table and stopped. Daniel looked up. He had the particular alertness of someone trained to notice unexpected approaches, but his expression was not defensive, just attentive. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Victoria said. "My son would very much like to join you, if you're comfortable with that. I realize it's an unusual request." The restaurant around them did not audibly stop. but something shifted in the ambient attention of the room. A man, 2 tables away, lowered his glass a few inches. A woman in a white dress paused mid-sentence. The sommelier, who had been moving toward a table at the back, stopped and stood still in a way that was almost imperceptible and entirely visible. Victoria Hale was known here, not in the way that required introduction, known in the way that certain people become part of the geography of a city. Their presence noted the way you note weather. Daniel Mercer looked at her for 1 second. Then he looked at Ethan, who was still sitting at the other table with his hands folded in his lap, watching. "Yes," Lily said, with the volume of someone who has been waiting for exactly this kind of thing to happen. Daniel almost smiled. "Sure," he said. Ethan crossed the 3 feet between the tables with a speed that he immediately tried to disguise as casual walking. He sat down across from Lily, and she looked at him with the frank, evaluative directness of a 7-year-old conducting a personality assessment. "Do you like spaghetti or penne?" she asked. "Penne," he said. She considered this. "Okay," she said, apparently deciding to overlook the character flaw. "I'm Lily. My dad is Daniel. He used to be a doctor, but now he just drives me to school and makes pancakes." "Lily," Daniel said. "What?" "It's true." She turned back to Ethan. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "What does your mom do?" "She runs a company." "What kind?" "Technology." "Like iPads?" "Sort of." "Cool," Lily said, and then moved immediately to a more important topic, which was whether Ethan had seen the movie about the robot dog, and what he thought, and whether he agreed that the ending was the saddest thing that had ever happened in a film. Ethan had strong opinions about the robot dog movie. Within 4 minutes, they were in a full analysis. Victoria and Daniel sat at opposite ends of the now shared table and watched their children talk. "He's a good kid," Daniel said. He said it the way he would say something was true, not as flattery, just as observation. "He's a quiet kid," Victoria said. She heard the difference in those 2 things even as she said them. "He's good too. I don't always know what's going on with him." Daniel glanced at Ethan, who was now leaning forward across the table explaining something to Lily with both hands. "He looks like he knows exactly what's going on with him," Daniel said. "Maybe he just hasn't had enough people ask." Victoria looked at him. He was not looking at her, he was watching the 2 kids. He had the particular quality of someone who says difficult things without trying to make them land as difficult. "He doesn't usually open up like this," she said. "Kids open up when nobody's watching them do it," Daniel said. "When the pressure's off." "Is there pressure?" she asked. And then, before he could answer, "Don't be diplomatic, I genuinely want to know." "There's always pressure when someone very important to you is also very far away," Daniel said. He was still watching the kids, even when they're physically in the same room. Kids feel the distance. He paused. "He's not broken. He's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "To find out if it's worth it to want things." Daniel finally looked at her. "To find out if the wanting will be met. That's the thing they're testing. All the time. They don't have language for it, but the test is always running." Victoria looked at Ethan. He was gesturing with his hands the way he rarely did broadly, unselfconsciously, his face animated. He looked like a different version of himself, or perhaps like the version that had been there all along. Waiting, as Daniel had said, to find out whether it was safe to come forward. She felt something that she did not have a precise word for. Not guilt, guilt was too static. Something more like a determination that had just found its particular object. The way water finds the shape of what it's poured into. Ethan looked up from his conversation with Lily, caught his mother's eye for half a second, and smiled an unguarded, unpremeditated smile, the kind Victoria had not seen from him in longer than she wanted to admit. She looked away first. The man's name was Preston Whitmore. He was 51, second-generation financial sector, and he occupied a table near the center of the room, with 2 colleagues and the comfortable loudness of someone who has never had to moderate himself in public because public spaces had always been his. He had noticed Victoria when she arrived. He always noticed Victoria not because he admired her, but because she represented a category of person he had been quietly losing ground to for 15 years, and tracking her movements was a habit that had calcified into reflex. When he saw her stand up and walk to the next table, when he processed what he was looking at, a woman who could buy this restaurant without checking her account balance, choosing to sit with a man in a canvas jacket who had arrived by subway. Something in his expression curled. "Is that Hale?" one of his colleagues murmured. "Yes," Whitmore said. "What's she doing?" He said it at a volume engineered to travel. "Guess Helios is hiring waitstaff now." The two colleagues laughed in the quiet, disciplined way of men who have learned to perform amusement on cue. The nearest waiter, a young man named Stephen, 3 months into the job, had been approaching Daniel's table to check on the new additions. He heard Whitmore's comment. He slowed slightly. He rerouted toward the kitchen instead. And when he came back, he was more attentive to the Whitmore table and less attentive to theirs. These were small things, the kind of small things that accumulate into the texture of an evening. Lily had not noticed, because she was 7 and had more important things to manage, namely convincing Ethan that the tiramisu was the superior dessert choice, and that the chocolate mousse he was considering showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the dessert menu. Daniel noticed all of it. Victoria noticed that he noticed. "Does that happen often?" she asked. "Often enough," Daniel said. He wasn't looking at Whitmore. He was refilling Lily's water glass. "It bothers me," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Don't let it. They need you to be bothered. That's the whole point." He set the water pitcher down. "The moment you react, you've given them the evening." "Daddy," Lily said. She'd heard something in the room. Children's ears are tuned to adult hostility with remarkable precision. "Why are they mad?" "They're not mad," Daniel said. "They just forgot what they came here for." He reached across and touched the top of her hand. "Focus on your pasta." "I already finished my pasta." "Then focus on your tiramisu." Lily accepted this and turned back to Ethan to continue explaining the emotional arc of the robot dog film. Victoria looked at Daniel across the table. She had built a company with 4,000 employees. She had navigated the specific and relentless condescension that the industry directed at women who refused to be managed. She had developed a set of responses to hostility precise, effective, chilling, that she deployed like instruments. And here was this man, in his olive jacket, deflecting contempt with 2 sentences and a glass of water. "Sometimes people forget what really matters," she said, repeating what he'd told Lily. "Yeah," he said. "I was one of them, for a while." Her phone lit up at 8:17. Not a message, a call, from Marcus Webb, her chief financial officer. A man who communicated by text with 90% of the human beings in his life, and who called in real time only when text would be insufficient. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me," she said. "There's a situation." Marcus's voice had the quality of something controlled under pressure, the way metal sounds when it's being bent without breaking. Stonegate Capital pulled their position this afternoon. Didn't file the disclosure until 30 minutes ago. Markets are closed, but the after-hours number is Victoria. It's significant. How significant? 11% in 3 hours. And there's a Reuters piece dropping at 9. Someone gave them the internal memo from the Q3 review. The Q3 review. The one she had presented to the board 6 weeks ago. The one that contained the forward guidance on the Singapore acquisition that was not supposed to be public for another month. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "Who knew about the memo?" she asked. "Board level only. Full board. No observers. That's 9 people, including you. Get them all on a call at 9:30. Don't tell them why. Just get them there." She stood up, moved a few feet from the table. "And get legal on standby. I want Carla specifically." "Done. Are you coming in?" "I'll be there by 9. She hung up. She stood still for a moment. The restaurant carried on around her, the low conversation, the clink of glass, the particular ambient warmth of a room full of people having normal evenings. She was aware of it the way you are aware of weather through a window. She had built Helios Dynamics from 11 people in a converted loft in Chelsea to a 4,000-person organization with offices in 7 cities. She had taken it public at a valuation that made the analysts who had underbid her initial roadshow look quietly foolish. She had navigated 2 hostile acquisition attempts, 1 government investigation, and the kind of sustained, low-level campaign of professional diminishment that women in her industry accepted as background noise or burned themselves out fighting. She had not, in 15 years, been betrayed from the inside. That was the part that sat in her chest differently from the financial exposure. The stock would recover, she knew that. She had the reserves and the roadmap, but someone at her table had decided to destroy something she had built with the specific cruelty of someone who knows exactly which load-bearing walls to hit. The symptoms came gradually, and then, all at once, the way they always did. The room contracting slightly at the edges, the sound becoming too large for the space, a wave of heat across her chest that was not physical heat. She had had panic attacks before 6 times in the last 4 years, always triggered by this specific combination of factors: betrayal stacked on top of financial threat, stacked on top of the knowledge that she was not in control. She put one hand on the back of a nearby chair and breathed. It was not enough. She heard a voice beside her, low, calm, without alarm. "Sit down." It was not a question, and it was not a suggestion. It was the tone of someone who has said those 2 words in high-stakes moments enough times that it has become its own kind of instruction, clean and immediate. Daniel had the chair behind her before she had processed that he'd moved. She sat. He crouched beside her, one hand on the arm of the chair, not touching her. "Eyes on me," he said. "Right here. You're okay." "I know I'm okay," she said. Her voice was thinner than she wanted it to be. "Good. Then prove it. 4 counts in." He held her gaze. She breathed in for 4 counts. Hold for 4. She held, out for 6. Good. Again. 3 cycles. The room stopped contracting. The heat across her chest receded to something manageable. He checked her pulse at the wrist, 2 fingers. Practiced, efficient, and then sat back on his heels and waited. "I'm fine," she said. "You're fine," he agreed, standing. "But you need to eat something before you go wherever you're going." She looked at him. He was already moving back toward the table, pulling the bread basket toward her side. He hadn't made a production of any of it. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "Old job," he said. Lily had watched the entire exchange with the focused attention of a child who understands that something important just happened and is determining whether to ask about it. She decided to ask about it. "Daddy fixed you," she told Victoria, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting the weather. "He helped," Victoria said. "He's good at that. He used to be a doctor." Lily picked up her spoon. He had to fix people really fast when they were really hurt, like in the army. "Lily," Daniel said. "It's not a secret," she said reasonably. "You're not in the army anymore." Victoria looked at Daniel. He was looking at his coffee, and his expression had the quality of someone standing in the doorway of a room they don't fully go into anymore. "Combat trauma surgeon," he said, after a moment. He said it the way you say a job title that belongs to a previous version of yourself accurately but at a slight remove. 2 deployments. 3rd one was going to be an instructor posting in San Diego. He paused. Then Claire got sick. Claire was Lily's mother. Victoria did not ask, and he did not offer more than that, and neither of them needed him to. What he did not say, what he carried in the particular silences of men who have compressed grief into function, was that Claire had been a pediatric nurse, that she had been 34 years old when the diagnosis came, that she had spent the last 8 months of her life making sure Lily had enough good memories to build on, curating them with the methodical love of someone who understood that she was building something for someone else to live in. She had made Daniel promise 3 things. Take Lily to the ocean every summer, read to her every night, and do not spend the rest of your life in a war zone. He had kept 2 of the 3 promises reliably and the 3rd imperfectly, which he thought she would have understood. When she died, he continued, Lily was 4. I got out. He picked up his coffee. People always say that like it was the hard decision. It wasn't. It was the only one. Ethan had gone quiet. He was listening in the way that children listen when adults talk about things that don't have clean edges, absorbing, not commenting. Do you miss it? Victoria asked. The medicine. Daniel considered this with the honesty of someone who had stopped giving polite answers to genuine questions. Sometimes I miss the clarity of it. In surgery, there's a right thing and a wrong thing, and you either do it in time or you don't. There's no, he moved his hand slightly, ambiguity. And this? She meant the jacket, the subway, the breadbasket, the cutting of pasta. This doesn't have clarity. But it has Lily. He shrugged, a small movement. That's not a trade-off. That's just the thing. Ethan looked at his mother. She was looking at Daniel, and her expression was doing something she had not chosen for it to do, which was to become briefly, quietly raw. She had spent 15 years in rooms where people told her what they were worth. She had become expert at evaluating those claims, at reading the distance between what someone said and what they wanted you to hear. She had never encountered a man who described sacrifice without reaching for credit, who accounted for everything he had given up and then simply moved on to the next sentence as though the accounting was complete and required no audience. She found it extraordinary. She did not say so. Ethan had watched the entire exchange with Daniel without saying anything. He had absorbed the story about Claire the way children absorb difficult things, not analyzing it, not filing it, just holding it somewhere near the center of himself where things he didn't yet have words for went to wait. He had also absorbed his mother's phone call. Not the content of it, he hadn't been close enough to hear the words, but the quality of her stillness afterward, the way she held the phone even after the call ended. He knew that stillness. He had grown up with that stillness. It was the particular absence his mother went into when something at work had become a problem. The way a lighthouse beam sweeps away from you and you are briefly in the dark. The panic attack did not announce itself. It rarely did. It came the way it always came from the inside, without warning. A sudden and total persuasion that something was wrong, that the air had thinned, that the room was slightly too large and slightly too loud, and that he had somehow become untethered from the normal, reliable weight of himself. Ethan did not announce what was happening to him. He just went still. The stillness was the kind Victoria had learned, over 2 years of watching it happen and not knowing how to stop it. To recognize the way you recognize the sky before a storm, a specific quality of held breath, of a small person turning inward and finding nothing solid. Ethan. Her voice came out too sharp. She saw him flinch and overcorrect, and the overcorrection made it worse. The way being told to calm down never makes anyone calm. His hands were flat on the table. His breathing had gone shallow and fast. Victoria reached for him and stopped, her hands hovering. Because every time she'd reached for him during one of these episodes, it had made him more agitated, not less, and she did not understand why, and that did not understanding made her feel a helplessness she had no language for. Daniel moved his chair around the table's corner and sat beside Ethan. Not across from him, beside him. "Hey," he said. His voice had dropped to something private and direct. Ethan looked. His eyes were scared in the way that made him look much younger than 11. "You've done this before," Daniel said. Not a question, an acknowledgement. "You know what it is. It's your body running an alarm that doesn't need to go off right now. We're going to turn it off. Can you do something for me?" A small nod. "Put your feet flat on the floor." Ethan put his feet flat. "Feel the floor? That's real. You're here. Now look around and tell me 5 things you can see. Ethan's eyes moved. The roses, he said. His voice was thin. The water glass. The candle. He blinked. The menu on that table. And your jacket. Good. 4 things you can feel. The chair. My hands. My feet on the floor. He paused. The table. Good. 3 things you can hear. Ethan listened. Talking. The music. Someone's fork. 2 things you can smell. The food. And something bread, I think. 1 thing you can taste. The pasta from before. Daniel watched him for a moment. Your breathing is normal, he said. The alarm turned off. Feel it? Ethan's shoulders had dropped 2 inches. His hands, which had been flat and pressed, were just resting. He exhaled the specific long exhale that comes at the end of something that is past. Yeah, he said. That's the drill. You practice it enough, you can do it anywhere. Airplane, classroom. Doesn't matter. Daniel's voice had not risen or fallen through any of this. It was just steady, like the floor Ethan had been asked to feel. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he leaned sideways and put his head briefly against Daniel's arm. Not quite a hug, not quite, not a hug. Something in between that lasted 3 seconds and then was over. Lily had watched all of this with the solemn attention she reserved for important things. He gets those too sometimes, she said, to no one in particular. Daddy always knows. Victoria was very still. She had seen therapists' reports. She had bought the books. She had asked the school counselor for strategies and written them down and tried them, and found that when the moment actually came, she forgot all of it because she was afraid. And her fear made her sharp, and sharpness was the wrong key for this particular lock. She had needed someone to tell her that. She had not expected it to be told to her by watching a stranger she had sat next to by accident. Victoria told Ethan she needed to take him to their driver, that he would have to go home with Mrs. Paulson tonight, that she was sorry. She said the last word like she meant it, which she did. Ethan nodded, put his blazer on, and shook Daniel's hand, actually shook it, a gesture of a solemnity that made something in the room feel formal and right. Same time next Tuesday? Lily asked Ethan. We don't come here every Tuesday, Ethan said. You should, she said simply. Victoria gave the driver instructions and came back inside. Daniel was still at the table. He had not asked her to come back, and she had not told him she would. She sat down. Tell me what's happening, she said. Not because I want advice. She stopped. I haven't said it out loud yet, and I need to before I walk into that building. He listened. She laid it out in 4 minutes. The Stonegate withdrawal, the Reuters piece, the leaked memo, the timing, the board meeting she was calling in 90 minutes. She watched his face while she talked, and his face was receiving information, organizing it, doing the thing trained minds do when they are building a picture from incoming data. The Stonegate withdrawal and the leak are the same event, he said. I know. Stonegate doesn't make a move like that on their own initiative without a reason to believe the stock has already peaked. They needed the story to be ready before they filed. That means the memo was promised to Reuters before they pulled their position. Probably a week ago, maybe 2. He turned his coffee cup on the saucer. Once. Whoever leaked it is holding shares they haven't disclosed, or someone they're connected to is. Victoria had arrived at a version of this conclusion in the 40 minutes since Marcus's call, but hearing it structured this way in the flat, analytical language of someone thinking about it from outside, without the adrenaline of personal exposure, made it cleaner, made it usable. How do you know how to think about this? She asked. He looked at her steadily. I spent 6 years planning ops in environments where someone on our side was always potentially compromised. You stop asking who would do this and start asking who had the access, the timing, and the personal incentive. He paused. Who on your board has been underperforming? Professionally, not just financially. someone who needs a win badly enough to create one. Victoria was quiet for 10 seconds. "Raymond Ashby," she said. "Who is he?" "Lead independent director. He was supposed to chair the Singapore Deal Committee. I restructured the committee 6 weeks ago and removed him from the chair." She met his eyes. 6 weeks ago, same time as the Q3 review. Yes, Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. The architecture of it had assembled itself in the air between them. "Is there anyone at that board meeting who will have his back?" he asked. 2 members, possibly 3. "Then don't call the meeting tonight." She started to object, and he continued, not raising his voice. "If you call them in now, you're reacting. You're agitated, it's late, you're at a disadvantage. He's had weeks to prepare for this. You've had 40 minutes. Give yourself 12 hours. Get the trading data. Get legal to pull Ashby's transaction history, and then walk into that room with the kind of certainty that makes people who are hiding something start to sweat before you say a word." The restaurant had thinned. Preston Whitmore and his colleagues were gone. The sommelier was restocking a cart near the bar. Outside, the avenue carried the particular movement of late Manhattan, purposeful and unhurried at once. "Why are you helping me?" Victoria asked. "You helped Lily get tiramisu," he said. "It's the least I can do." She almost laughed. It surprised her. She called the board meeting for 10 in the morning. She told Marcus to schedule it as a strategic update and to make it mandatory. She spent the night not sleeping but working, which was, for Victoria Hale, a state she understood better than sleep. She worked the way surgeons work the night before, a complicated procedure not from anxiety, but from a kind of focused reverence for what the morning required. She pulled every document. She mapped the timeline backward from the Reuters publication, pinning dates to the wall of her office on a pad of self-adhesive paper the way she had in the early years when the company was small enough that a wall could hold the whole picture. Carla Newen from Legal had Raymond Ashby's public filing history pulled by midnight. His wife's brokerage account had executed a put position on Helios stock 14 days ago. Not Raymond's account, his wife's, through a fund manager 3 removes from the family. Clean, careful, almost untraceable. Almost. Victoria spent the next 6 hours building the presentation with Carla and Marcus, and a forensic accountant named Greg Solis, whom she trusted absolutely. She worked in her corner office, the city spread out behind the glass, and she thought about what Daniel had said: don't react, prepare, and let that steadiness run like a thread through everything she built. At 9:45, she stood in the women's room on the 43rd floor and looked at herself in the mirror. Gray suit, hair back. The face of someone who has decided she had been afraid the night before for about 20 minutes. She acknowledged this to herself honestly, the way she tried to acknowledge things she would rather not. Then she had gone back to the wall of notes and kept working. Because fear was useful for approximately 20 minutes, and after that it became noise. She thought briefly of Ethan, of the way he had put his head against Daniel's arm for 3 seconds, of the way he had smiled across the table, that unguarded smile. She walked into the boardroom at 10 exactly. There were 9 people around the table. Raymond Ashby was seated at his usual position, 2 from the end. He was a man in his mid-60s with good hair and the practiced composure of someone who had spent 40 years in rooms like this one. He smiled when she came in. She let the smile sit there. She opened without preamble. Last night at 9 o'clock, Reuters published internal documentation from our Q3 review. I want to talk about how that happened and what we're going to do about it. I also want to talk about Stonegate's withdrawal, which was timed in advance of that publication. She clicked to the first slide. And I want to talk about a series of put options on Helios stock that were executed 2 weeks ago through a fund managed by Whitfield Capital, which handles discretionary accounts for several families represented in this room. The room absorbed this in silence. Raymond Ashby's composure went from practiced to maintained. There was a difference. She had learned to see it. These options, she continued, were placed by an account registered to a Vanessa Ashby through a beneficial ownership structure that required some effort to trace. She looked at Raymond for the first time since she'd begun. "Good morning, Raymond." "Victoria, I'm not finished." She held his gaze and kept her voice entirely level. "The SEC notification is being filed at 11 o'clock by our general counsel. Independent members, you'll receive a briefing from legal at noon. I want to be clear that this board's fiduciary integrity is fully intact, and our response to this situation will demonstrate that to the market before close of business today." She closed her folder. "Raymond, you'll be escorted from this building at the end of this meeting. Your personal items will be boxed and delivered. If you have anything to say to this board before you leave, now is the time." He had nothing to say. No one else spoke. The particular silence of a room in which something has been decided without appeal settled over the long table. Victoria closed the meeting 20 minutes later. She walked back to her office, shut the door, stood at the window. 43 floors below, the city moved in its morning patterns. Taxis, delivery trucks, the copper awning of a coffee shop flapping in a gust off the river. She picked up her phone and sent a text. It said, "It worked." 3 minutes later, the reply said, "I know. Lily saw the headline on my phone and wants to know if your company makes robots." Victoria looked at this message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Tell her we're working on it." Then, after a pause, she added, "Thank you. For the other night. All of it." The reply came after a minute. Victoria looked at this for another moment. Then she smiled. 3 weeks passed. The stock recovered. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. Raymond Ashby's resignation was accepted, and a replacement was being screened. The Reuters story, stripped of its original intent, became instead a narrative about Helios's transparency and decisive governance. Marcus called it the best bad news the company had ever had. He was not entirely wrong. In the week after the board meeting, 3 institutional investors who had been watching Helios from the sidelines increased their positions. An interview request came from a business magazine that had, 2 years earlier, run a piece questioning Victoria's leadership approach. She declined it and spent the hour she would have used on it having lunch with Ethan instead. This was not a grand gesture. She didn't tell anyone. She simply picked him up from school and walked with him to a sandwich place he liked, and let him talk about the robot dog movie in more detail than she had previously allowed, and found that the movie was actually interesting when you paid attention to what he was saying about why it mattered. "The robot doesn't want to be fixed," Ethan explained, around a mouthful of turkey on sourdough. "He wants to be remembered. Those are different things." Victoria considered this. "You're right," she said. "They are." He looked at her briefly, checking whether she meant it. She met his eyes and held them. He went back to his sandwich with the small satisfaction of a person who has been heard. Victoria worked less. Not dramatically less, she was still Victoria Hale, and the company was still her first language. But she left the office by 7 2 nights out of 5. She had dinner with Ethan 3 times in 1 week. She learned watching a video she found online, watching it twice the grounding exercise Daniel had used, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sequence, and she practiced it until she knew it well enough to remember it under pressure. On a Saturday in early November, she took Ethan to Central Park. The last of the autumn color was hanging on a maple near the Bethesda fountain, still burning orange in the late morning light, the paths covered with a soft, dry layer of the week's falling. Joggers moved past. Dogs pulled at their leashes. Somewhere across the lake, a child was flying a kite with the focused intensity of someone managing a negotiation. Daniel and Lily were already there, by previous arrangement, at the bench north of the fountain. Lily was wearing a red coat. She was explaining something to a squirrel, which had paused on the bench arm, possibly out of confusion, and was being given very direct information about something. When she saw Ethan, she stood up, pointed at the squirrel, and said, "He agrees with me," in a tone that suggested this settled a debate that hadn't been happening. Ethan walked over and sat beside her, and they began the squirrel conversation immediately, without preamble, as though they had known each other for years, which, in the way that certain children know each other, the immediate, unconditional way they had. Victoria sat beside Daniel. They watched the lake for a moment. "I offered you a job," she said. "You did. You said no." "I did." "I'm not going to offer you another one," she said. "That's not what I want." He turned to look at her. "I don't know exactly what I do want," she said. "I'm better at 5-year roadmaps than I am at this particular kind of uncertainty. But I know that Ethan is different since that night. I know that I'm different since that night. And I know that Lily has a father, who is," she paused, "choosing. The kind of person I want my son to have in his life." A leaf came down from somewhere above and landed on the bench between them. "That's a lot of things to know," Daniel said. "For me, it's practically certainty." She watched Ethan, who was now helping Lily try to convince the squirrel to accept a piece of a granola bar. "I schedule everything. I don't know how to do this without scheduling it. So, schedule it," he said. "Saturday mornings. Here, or anywhere they want." She nodded toward the children. "And whatever else follows from that." Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it got when he was being honest without armor. "I haven't done whatever else follows from that in a long time," he said. "Lily needs to be okay with it. She has to come first." "Of course she does," Victoria said. She looked at Lily, who had abandoned the squirrel negotiation and was teaching Ethan a handshake with multiple steps. "I think she's already decided." Daniel watched his daughter for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She has." Lily looked up from the handshake demonstration, saw both adults watching her, and pointed at them. "Stop staring," she said. "It's weird." Ethan put his hand over his eyes in the manner of someone experiencing second-hand embarrassment. Daniel laughed first. Victoria followed, and the laugh surprised her, not the polite, controlled version she deployed in professional contexts, but the kind that comes from a place below the professional register, the kind that had been quiet for a long time, and was now, apparently, becoming reacquainted with the air. The lake reflected the last of the maple. Ethan had learned the handshake. It had 7 steps and ended with a thing Lily called the explosion, which involved spreading your fingers wide and making a sound she described as kind of like psh. He practiced it twice, both times incorrectly, both times earning detailed corrective feedback from Lily delivered with the patience of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who invented the handshake and therefore owned the rubric. They walked eventually, all 4 of them, along the path toward the Loeb boathouse. Lily walked between the 2 adults for a stretch, holding Victoria's hand on one side without asking, and Daniel's on the other without thinking, and Ethan walked ahead slightly the way children do when they are too old to hold hands in public, but not yet sure what to do with their hands instead. Victoria noticed the weight of Lily's hand. It was the specific, uncalculated weight of a child who is simply holding on because it is what you do, because you are walking somewhere and the ground is uneven and there are people around and a hand is the right thing. She could not remember the last time she had been held onto that way. It had nothing to do with company valuations or board seats or the particular kind of power she had spent 20 years building. It was entirely outside those categories and entirely sufficient. Ethan glanced back. He saw his mother walking with her hand held by Lily, and he saw Daniel beside her. And he processed this tableau with the particular expressiveness of an 11-year-old trying not to have an expression, which produced an expression of profound, involuntary relief. He turned back around. He put his hands in his pockets. He walked a little slower, so the 4 of them were, more or less, walking together. The maple burned. The kite was still up across the lake, a bright red V against the pale November sky, riding a wind that no one below could feel, but that it found anyway. That it always found, climbing steadily toward the top of what the day would give it. Victoria Hale had built a company from a whiteboard and an idea she believed in absolutely. She had navigated markets and governments and the specific and relentless arithmetic of ambition. She had learned to function without sleep and to read rooms and to hold her own counsel in spaces designed to make people like her feel like guests. She had never learned what to do with an ordinary Saturday. She was, it turned out, a reasonably quick study. Daniil did not look at her when he spoke. He was watching Ethan, who had found a stick and was considering what to do with it. "Same time next week?" he said. "I'll schedule it," she said. "Of course you will. I'll also clear the Sunday after." She paused. "And possibly most of December." He looked at her then. "That's a lot of calendar," he said. "I have a very good assistant," she said. Lily, who had been listening to all of this while appearing to look at a pigeon, nodded once with the satisfaction of someone watching a plan come together. Ethan threw the stick into the leaf pile at the base of the nearest oak. It made a satisfying sound. He looked back at the four of them. "Can we get hot chocolate?" he asked. "Yes," said Daniel. "Absolutely," said Victoria, at the same time, in the same tone, with the same unguarded completeness. They looked at each other. Lily giggled. Ethan pretended not to have noticed. The four of them walked on toward the boathouse, through the dry leaves and the November light and the ordinary, extraordinary afternoon that had been waiting, though none of them had known it since the moment a boy in a navy blazer looked across the space between two tables and saw something he recognized and could not name. He had a name for it now. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but he was getting there. That evening, after the hot chocolate and the long walk back through the park and the drive home with Lily's voice still in his ears, Ethan sat on his bed in the 42nd floor apartment and thought about the squirrel who had agreed with Lily and the handshake with 7 steps, and the way the autumn light had come through the maple and made everything briefly golden. He thought about Daniel telling him to put his feet on the floor and feel it. He practiced the breathing. 4 in. Hold for 4. 6 out. It worked even when nothing was wrong. Down the hall, Victoria Hale was sitting at her desk, not working, which was unusual enough to be notable. She was writing a list in a paper notebook, which she almost never used. The list was short and written in her careful, angular hand. It said, Saturdays, Sundays when possible. December. The ocean next summer. Read to him more. Ask before assuming. Then, below a small gap, in slightly smaller letters. Don't be afraid of slow. She looked at that last line for a moment. Then she closed the notebook, turned off her desk lamp, and walked down the hall to Ethan's room. She sat on the edge of his bed and asked him what he thought about next Saturday. And he said good, and she asked him what he was reading. And he told her, and she listened, and neither of them brought up the fact that this was something new. It was enough that they both knew it. Across the city, Daniel was reading to Lily. The book was about a bear who builds a boat, which Lily considered flawed in its premise. Bears don't build boats, Daddy, but tolerated for the illustrations. He read 2 chapters, and when he closed the book, she was already most of the way asleep. He sat in the chair by her bed for a few minutes in the dark. He thought about the morning in Afghanistan when everything had changed, about the operating table in a forward base with no real ceiling, about what your hands learn when your hands are all there is between a person and the place they're going. He thought about the 2 years after Claire, the years that had no structure except Lily, the years that had been the hardest and the most clarifying thing he had ever lived through. He thought about a woman at a corner table, putting her phone down. He thought about what it had looked like, that phone going face down on the white linen, the small, deliberate weight of that gesture, and he thought that people who are capable of that, of choosing the thing in front of them over the thing in their hand, are capable of more than they know. Lily turned over in her sleep and said something that wasn't words. He put her blanket straight. Outside the window, the city did what it always did, moved and lit itself and carried on in its 10,000 simultaneous directions, indifferent to any particular story unfolding inside it. Somewhere above the park, the wind was up. Somewhere in Midtown, a maple still held a few leaves that would let go before morning. Somewhere a light came on in a window on the 42nd floor, and then After a while, went off again. The city did not notice, but the people in it did.